Ryan Ruocco will be on the call when the Sixers host the Spurs in the first half of ESPN's Wednesday night NBA doubleheader. It's Nuggets Jazz in the second game. Coverage starts at 7 with NBA Countdown. Then catch Sixers Spurs 8 o'clock on ESPN television and the mobile app. And Ryan Ruocco, kind enough to join us now as the Sixers' big win last night with Embiid just going off. Harden had a big game, not enough. Sixers win big. Ryan, welcome back. How are you, pal?
I'm good, man. How you doing?
I was at the game last night. It's the first time I've ever heard a guy on a 10-day contract get his name chanted. Corey Brewer was getting chanted in there, and we had him on earlier, and he said, I've had my name chanted before, but never on a 10-day. That's Philly for you, right?
You know what? It really is, though, right? Like, if you want to be a place where you know your contributions are going to be completely appreciated and your missteps will be absolutely pointed out, I think Philly is for you.
So obviously Corey Brewer is not like the last championship piece here, but when you do your research for Philly and you're starting to look at them, all right, we're about halfway through. What do they still lack?
You know, I mean, I think there's still a bit of a lack of depth, right? Like, I mean, if we think of, and I know this is a sort of tired storyline, for those who watch the Sixers and follow the Sixers. But, I mean, it really shocked me last year how much of a difference getting Ilyasova and Bellinelli made for them. I mean, you guys know the numbers. Their record was night and day. And obviously that winning streak at the end of the season happened, in large part due to the contributions they got from those two guys. And, finding that kind of depth, I think, is still something to consider with this team because they didn't necessarily fill those slots. In fact, they've gotten thinner after the trade for Butler, even if they've gotten better because they have a higher ceiling, if you will, with the high-end talent. And I think that that's something that still will need to be addressed. I think the encouraging thing for Philadelphia is, when you look at the East, obviously Boston did not ascend to the juggernaut that many of us anticipated they would be this year with their returning stars and then the depth they already had. So I think it's wide open and it's totally up for grabs, but I'm just not sure where Philly draws from if they want to address those needs for just a few more quality players to put around the top-tier talent that they have.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, Ryan, like this team is very young. Watching them last night, I mean, Shamet and Bolden and Korkmaz, I mean, those guys are like first- and second-year players, yet we always want to rush like, okay, can they win the championship now? But it might be okay to say maybe they're not ready right now. They're pretty darn good, but, man, 3 to 5 years from now, if this team stays together, they might be really scary.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're 100% right. I think a lot of times, the most underrated part of our evaluation of teams is its incumbent players improving, right? I mean, especially with the, renewed emphasis on player development in the NBA, I think that's something you absolutely have to consider is just how much better a team can be a year or two. I mean, the Celtics are a perfect example of that, right? How they took a lot of guys who didn't have a ton of fanfare, continued to improve, and then when they planted that other star, they were ready to pop with those guys around them. So, yes, you're right. The stars are here, and maybe it's really about the development of the complementary and role pieces. I'd say the one caveat to that is, what kind of timetable are you looking at with the Butler and Redick pieces, right? Because it's easy to say that for Simmons and Embiid and the guys you mentioned off the bench who are all young, but can you feel that way knowing you're looking to convince, Butler to stay or you're going to maximize what's left of his prime, and that Redick is an essential piece to this team, and obviously while he's not old by any means, he is certainly ripe for winning. So I think that's an interesting conversation that Philadelphia will have to have, because if they believe that Shamet's really going to develop and Korkmaz is really going to develop and Bolden is as well, then you're right. You got to be careful with what you're willing to do at the deadline just to improve for the year.
Ryan Ruocco, ESPN tomorrow night has the game. It's Sixers Spurs. When you look at Milwaukee, Indiana, Boston, Toronto, what separates maybe if there is separation between them and what Philly brings to the table, or do you think it's just 5 teams, put them in a hat, and then come April, pick them out, and we'll see what happens?
I mean, I think Milwaukee and Toronto have separated themselves a little bit at this moment, but by the time the playoffs come around, I would not be shocked at all if Boston is the team that we look at and say has the best chance. And you're going to feel really good about Philly just because they're going to have the best trio of players of any of those teams. I don't, I think that if you look at Milwaukee, they have the single most unstoppable force of any of these teams. And that's with all due respect to Embiid, who is an absolute monster himself. But Giannis is of a slightly different ilk with what he's able to do. And so I think that would be where you feel good with them. Plus, their starting five almost reminds me of what Philadelphia had last year in their starting five, with just the way the pieces all fit so perfectly. And I think Milwaukee has some of that with their starting five. With Toronto, I think they have a very good first-year head coach. They've seen huge strides with some of the players they've developed. And obviously they have, maybe the best two-way player in the game in Kawhi Leonard. And so if you have that, I think you're going to feel good in any series. Indiana's the interesting one, right? Because they keep getting better. But, I think it's still hard for us to buy into if they have enough top-tier talent to hang with the other big dogs. However, if we watch the Eastern Conference playoffs last year, they played Cleveland better than any of the teams that Cleveland beat, including Boston, even though that was a Game 7 too. Indiana, I thought, played Cleveland much tougher. So I'm describing all this to say it's hard for me to convince myself that one team has a much better chance than anybody else. I would not be shocked if any of those teams were to go to the finals. I do think if I had to bet, by the time the playoffs come around, for a lot of us, Boston would again be the favorite.
Do you think, we have this debate a lot, do you think it's same old Raptors, or does Kawhi Leonard change that narrative? Because there's some people that say, I've seen the Raptors, I'll only believe it once they win that series. And I would be on the other side that says, it's not the same old Raptors because they didn't have Kawhi Leonard before, and that guy is a difference maker. To put them on the same level as the old Raptors, I don't think it's fair.
Yeah, I don't think it's fair either. I look at it completely differently because it's Kawhi and it's also Danny Green too, right? When you're talking about important pieces that have finals experience and big game experience and success in those moments at the highest level, those two guys experienced a lot of that in San Antonio. And I don't think either one of them is getting, and especially obviously Kawhi is going to be the much more crucial piece, but Danny Green also plays a role, and I don't think either one of them is getting into a playoff series and expecting to lose or going to have anything in their mind that says, here we go again. They didn't experience that. They don't have that mental hurdle to get over. Maybe Kyle Lowry does, maybe to a certain degree Jonas Valanciunas does, but I'm not even sure that Fred VanVleet does or Pascal Siakam, or OJ Anunoby. Those guys were, just really starting to become big pieces of the attack last year. So for me, it was more about the Lowry DeRozan combination, Valanciunas, right? But when you put guys who, DeRozan, very, very good player, and probably even more appreciated now that he's gone to a different destination. But Leonard is in a different tier, right? He's a top 3-4 player in the game.
Totally different.
So, yeah, when you put him on that team, it's hard for me to say oh yeah, they're going to be thinking, here we go again. We've seen this story before. It really is. I think they're a totally different animal, and if I'm them, I feel outstanding about my chances to go to the finals.
Ryan Ruocco on the call, Sixers, Spurs. I'll leave you with this. Golden State, they got Boogie. The West seems lesser than it's been. So is the West less intriguing than the East this year?
I think the East is more intriguing than it's been in a very long time, obviously, for two main reasons. One, no LeBron, so we don't have to just say it's a fait accompli, right? But two, there's also a lot of other really good quality teams. You look at the top 5 teams in the East, and we just talked about how, you kind of feel like it's a crapshoot amongst all of them, and they all are, it's not like they're poor teams. They're all really good teams. And so I think that makes the East incredibly intriguing. In the West, I think you still feel like it's Golden State and then everybody else. So 2 through 8, there's not a lot of separation, maybe even 2 through 11 or 12, right? There's not a lot of separation. That, I think, makes the Western Conference playoffs intriguing. I think if Golden State is completely healthy, it will be especially hard for us to buy into any team in the West challenging them. However, up until this last stretch, they did look a little more vulnerable, and they're obviously one injury away from being in the middle of the pack with everybody else in that slew of teams. So, I think the West will be interesting 2 through 8 in the playoffs, but I think we're going to be watching it believing, hey, unless something weird happens with Golden State, of course they're going to be back.
Ryan Ruocco will be on the call tomorrow night. If you hear the fans chanting Corey Brewer, don't be surprised.
You know what? You actually severely helped me with my prep, so I appreciate that.
All right, pal. We'll hear you tomorrow night. Sixers, Spurs, ESPN's first half of the doubleheader, and then it's Nuggets Jazz, another good one in the second game. Coverage starts at 7. Thanks, Ryan.
Got it. Thanks a lot, man.